today. I have a great friend that I haven't been talking to in a long while, but we met once at World Domination Summit in Portland, the wonderful city of Portland, in 2016, I think it was. I'm not sure, but about is there. For sure.
Some years ago.
Yeah. And I wanted to talk to you, Pamela Slim. Welcome, Pam.
I'm so happy to be here.
Is because you have a new book, and when I was talking to you, I also back in 2016, I also learned about what you do and how your business works, and yeah, the things that you set up in Mesa, in your city. And I've been reading about that part, and I think it's a wonderful thing to give some lights and shed some lights on what you're doing and how you're running this. And also, of course, the funny thing is that I started blogging in 2005.
Me too.
Yeah, and I learned from your really successful blog, Escape from Cubicle Nation. And it's where I got to know you first and subscribed to your email list and learned about blogging and everything. Not from your blog, but from your writing. And so it was really cool to see your books coming out and to learn more about you. If you look back now, right, because your second book is Body of Work. If you look back now, how would you describe what your body of work is?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think in general, and as I look in phases, because now that I'm 55, there have been like a variety of different phases, much like an artist or actor or something. The last 25 years, I really break down and look at my body of work in terms of phases of what I was doing. So in the last 15 has been really the deep dive into the world of startups that, as you said, was Escape from Cubicle Nation and really doing all kinds of work there. Prior to that, for 10 years, when I did management consulting, I was also really leaning into the human side of business and understanding, always working with people on how to have a better, more effective organization, but it was much larger organizations that I worked with earlier. And then the earlier phases of my work were in international development and community development. That was my major in college. And when I look at that and I look at the threads that go between all the work that I've done and really what I'm passionate about, definitely there's always been a big thread about bringing people together around a cool, creative type of activity. So even in the early days when I was I was a volunteer executive director for a capoeira group, an Afro-Brazilian martial art group in San Francisco. And I did that for 11 years. That was my 20s. That was the stage of my body work in my 20s. So by day, I was a corporate training person, and then I would take the train and go and sometimes help teach 3 classes an evening. And that work, what really drew me to that first was just a passion for the art, but noticing the way that people transformed themselves and also in connection with each other as they were pursuing something that was highly creative and really bringing something to life. So that there's just this feeling for me that I get every day, which it just feels so thankful to still have so much joy for the work that I do, because it's always about helping things come to life and helping people transform in the way they understand themselves, but also in the way that they understand how it is that we can be working together in order to bring things to life. And that feels to me to be a lot of the thread in general, in terms of like what my focus has been. And then in the way I define body of work in the book Body of Work was everything you create, you contribute, you affect, and you impact throughout the course of your life. So that is tangible things like books. So now I happen to have 3, which is sort of amazing. I can't believe I got all those out of my head. But really, when I think about it, and in that book, one of the main premises is when you look back at the end of your life, hopefully a long time for you and I from now, and for your listeners as well. But when we look back at the end of our life, what would we see? What would we want to see? What would be that impact? And to me, the biggest thing that I think about is not so much the tangible things that I've created, like books, but really the relationships that I've built and the way that people have also connected with each other. And just that sense of what I hope, what I always wish for is that people feel better, stronger, more capable, and they believe in themselves more for what they can create as a result of us colliding in some way. So that's a really long answer to that question.
No, but I can see it. So if, like you said, we hope to have still a long and prosperous life, but still, when people will talk about you once you have died, if I understand it right, you love them to talk about the connections they made through you.
Yes. There's actually one of my clients once named it, they call it the Pamela. And so it sounds like a cult, which is why I don't generally use that term. But because I love to bring people together, and I think the nature of the way I do community building is I try as much as possible not to center myself as the person who's always everybody is coming for. We all get connected to each other and like learning from each other, but it's creating an environment in which really interesting people can meet each other. And very often, all kinds of things happen as a result of that. Lifelong friendships. There was even a marriage that happened with one of my friends in New York, business partnerships, all kinds of things like that. So that experience of holding space, of knowing how to build community, of just, I think having an eye, I always say, you can say whatever you want to about me, that's totally fine. But I have great taste in people. Some people know art, some people know fine wines. I really have an eye and an ear and a feel for people.
That's a really beautiful saying. Great taste in people. If you, I have a question here, because I've listened to a couple of interviews of you around this book, and one of the things that you say that you don't like is right. So when somebody's in the center, right? So when they're like a guru and they're in the center and they say you have to get everything from me, and I'm the person that knows everything, right? And I have an issue with me here, right? And I think, and you have a similar thing because that's why I'm asking this question. So when you do this, and you have a website which is called ErnoHanninkNL or PamelaSlim.com, how do you see this? Because I need to rephrase this a little bit. You also have this community center where you are sitting right now on Main Street in Mesa, right? So this is where you bring people together, and it has a different name, right? So it's K Main Street Learning Lab, right?
That's right.
Do you think it is an advantage that you have? Is your branding is around you, or would it be better if the branding is around like a general name?
It's a question for each person to answer individually according to what's important to you. The context for me that I see it in is in the context of the theory of change that each of us has about our work. So what's our philosophy about work? What is the role that we see in that work? And in the context of the model of the book, because the book is really a method for how it is that you might think of strategically about how it is that you want to build an audience or build a community. In my theory of change, in that strategic framework, the focus in my business is in really deeply understanding who my ideal customers are, what are the kinds of problems or challenges that they have, really centering their experience, understanding the ecosystem that surrounds them, meaning all the peers, partners, media hubs, companies that are helping them to solve the problem. So for you and I, working with small business owners, we have so many wonderful ecosystem partners. We have intellectual property attorneys and accountants and software companies that help our customers run their businesses and us run our businesses. We have all these peers and partners. Within that ecosystem, we can have our own beacon which I define as that place, when philosophically, my main job in my business, my approach to business, is to really get to know the ecosystem that surrounds my ideal clients, to build partnerships, to make connections, to be doing that community building and really strategic alignment so that my clients feel supported by a broader network of people. But within that, for me to be sharing who I am and my unique point of view, that's where I have my beacon, where I can choose to deliberately show up and say, here I am. It's not that we don't have a place in the ecosystem. It's in the messaging of the book, when people want to come, and they might run into me and you, where we might both be speaking at a small business conference, and people are learning from each other. We're all sharing ideas, but then they say, I really wanted to learn more about you and who you are. That's where I think it's perfectly clear and fine to have a site that's around you, because that's your beacon, where you say, this is who I am, this is what I believe, this is my point of view. And just because you have a site that's focused on who you are, your philosophy and your theory of change does not have to be, I am an empire, look at me, look at me. That's the messaging that comes from that site. So it is an interesting way for folks that might be more wired to think in terms of community or not centering themselves. We can get a little bit binary sometimes, of either saying you show up fully all the time where you're the center, or you shouldn't show up at all. And my point of view is, absolutely, every person wants to show up in a way that feels authentic to them and in which you're sharing your point of view. But as you look at that broader perspective of how you actually do your work, what your messaging is, and how you talk to your clients, that's where there can be a really big difference. So it's not me saying, you need to follow my method, otherwise you're not going to be successful. And whatever you do, don't work with that other person. All the stuff that we see. What I call mafia culture in Escape from Cubicle Nation. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, yeah.
Does that make sense, the way you think about it for yourself?
I'm in the middle of renaming my business, my website, and my podcast, because I'm going to be cooperating with other people on scaling up impact, or having impact for companies in the world, right? So that they can grow the impact of the business that they have. And I feel that if I keep my website on my name, and also still keep building my platform, my name,
yeah,
it makes it difficult for people to connect to the whole group, right? So I'm part of the group, and we want to grow this whole idea. And then I'm here also strongly saying, okay, but also I'm ErnoHannik, and I do this and this and this. Right. So I'm changing the name so it will be easier to put it under the umbrella, right? Because I have my own topic, that is clear, and that is also what we want. We each have our own topics. But it's about decision making and making decisions to make impact with your company, and so then it fits a lot better. So it makes it easier also for me to put, for example, a episode like this on the website, the general website, because then it's about deciding for impact instead of it's the ErnoHannik show, right? So it makes it easier to disconnect. So that's why I'm asking this, because I'm in the middle of this whole process.
That's right. And a lot of business owners, so many of my clients have that same kind of, struggle sometimes and thought process. It really does depend on what your business model is, what your objectives are. As an individual author, it is, because I do have my own work for things like books, it's helpful to have a place. But sometimes, as you're describing with your own business, or what a lot of folks do, is where you might get to a stage in business. A lot of people might start just growing it like a consulting or coaching practice themselves. It can grow into more the entity of the business, in which the messaging, the model is more about that. And then sometimes that's where people might have a simple presence, where it's just a one page that is really describing you. So you can still maintain that if people still have that interest. But it's that's the part that's always interesting, as we're shaping our body of work. It's how, I always say I'm an author practitioner. So I write about what I experience and what my clients do. But one of the things in body of work is when we do naturally go through different stages and transitions in our business, it does mean that we need to be changing the story about what we're doing. And it also means we have this exploration about the theory of change, simply meaning like, what is our point of view about the work that we're doing? What is our role in it? Who is our audience? If our audience shifts, then what might be a different way that we want to be talking about ourselves?
Right.
So it's always an evolution. And I know it always takes so much to go through that process for anybody who's rebranding. You wish you could just do it once and set it and forget it, but I hate to break it to you. It doesn't work that way.
I know. Oh my gosh, I've changed my audience a couple of times, and it's just a lot of work, and you have to start all over again, and it's just, and then you get all these people that are on your email, that were on my email list, that knew me from before, and have this background with this one topic I talked about, then have other people that have familiarity with this other topic I talked about, and then I shifted again, so I have to start. So I've done this. I know what I'm doing, and I'm not happy about it. This, tell me a bit more about, because I think it's really interesting what you've set up here in Mesa. And I say here, but I'm not there, but you are. And if you look at the video, you can see in the background, you can see the office. So tell me a bit more about the K Main Street Learning Lab. How does this work, and why did you set it up?
My husband and I co-founded the K Main Street Learning Lab in 2016, and it was not foreseen. It actually was the result of doing an earlier, I called it the Unbook Tour, with a nod to my friend Scott Stratton, who wrote Unmarketing and Unselling. And what I did is I went to 23 different cities, and 22 in the US and Vancouver, Canada. And I was really workshopping ideas for the book, because this framework, the general framework for the approach to community building, is one that I really had been practicing for about 30 years, from the time my early undergraduate college days. And then a lot of the work that I had done building online community through Escape from Cubicle Nation. So I thought it would be really interesting, instead of writing a book and then going on tour, and thank God I did it now, because it wouldn't be safe to be traveling to all these places. I was able to really test the ideas with real people in different cities, which was wonderful and gave me so much profound insight into what would be useful to include in the book. In doing that, for some reason, the very first city that I presented to in Berkeley, California, I'm from the Bay Area in California originally. In the very first city, I asked the question, how many of you have ever seen a Native American business expert presenting at a business conference? My husband is Navajo, First Nation Native American, and so it's something that's always been important to me and of interest. And I just noticed how even in communities that were very actively engaged in inclusive work within our small business entrepreneurship community, it was so rare to ever see any Native American business experts as presenters, even though I knew that there were so many. So I asked that question in Berkeley, and I ended up asking the same question all around the country, out of 23 cities, and only 7 people ever had, and 4 of those were in Vancouver, Canada. So it was quite sobering. As the parent of Native children, our kids are, Anglo and Navajo, and I have so many nieces and nephews, extended family and relatives. It was sobering. And when we think about in my own country what was happening in 2016, it was a pretty significant shift of a lot of challenge to inclusive practices for many folks of color and generally marginalized communities. And so my husband and I really had deep conversation and said, what can we do in our own city in order to address this problem? And so we decided to open up a physical space that by day is my office and his office. He's a traditional healer. And so by day it's our office. And then the evenings and the weekends, the space is just available for communities, especially Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian folks of color, to gather and really just to highlight their own leadership, to be producing events. the approach that we have to this work, we learned as we went. We spent a lot of years just engaging with people, welcoming people in, sitting down, talking to them, figuring out what they wanted to do with a space. But what we found in having a space available that was beautiful, warm, welcoming, equipped with a beautiful whiteboard wall, all the things that one needs in order to do good dreaming and scheming, it naturally grew itself, the point of view and the perspective of what people wanted. We didn't need to have some big top-down program where I was creating a program to say, first of all, let me teach people how to be small business owners, because the assumption of most of my white peers that would be coming in from other programs is, well, Pam, you are the expert. And so what are you teaching in order to improve the leadership of these leaders? And I was like, that is not the problem. The problem is not that there is not leadership. The problem is there's no visibility. The problem is there are systemic barriers to the visibility of folks. The problem is there is lack of trust between communities for people to feel safe going into an environment that historically has not welcomed them. So in really just addressing having a space available, more wonderful, cool, creative things happened than we ever could have imagined if we had just started from the beginning and said, let's create a whole bunch of programs and then try to invite people in. It's just been an amazing, transformational experience to really see what has happened, and it just continues to grow very organically. Of course, we were shut down during the quarantine, but it's been a really beautiful experience.
What are, I think it's an interesting topic, right? So we saw, of course, the problems at, I think it was like 2019, 2020 with the riots and everything was going on in the US. And we looked from it and we saw the Black Lives Matter movement really getting more international awareness, attention. What are some of these barriers that you talked about for these kind of people, and not just indigenous but colored people?
Yeah, for folks of color, I often highlight the way that these communities might describe their own challenges. So I'm always walk a fine line of not speaking for anybody, just always to be really clear. That's part of why I like to highlight leaders and maybe give some examples of folks that we've worked with. But Amanda Blackhorse is an amazing Navajo activist who we got to know through the space, and she did some events here and preparation. She took the case of, there was a Washington, D.C. football team that they called the Redskins, which is a very strong ethnic slur, very, very offensive. And she had taken the case against the team all the way to the Supreme Court of the U.S. It was actually rejected. And it was through, as an example of looking at ways in which historically, in the case of many indigenous folks, have been portrayed in the media in a very derogatory way, the way that culture or art is appropriated, is used and mocked. You see with many U.S. football teams that have Native American names, or things like, the Chiefs or the Braves and the Redskins, people would do, mocking kind of movements and dances and wear headdresses and face paint and all these things that are very offensive. So there could be really direct things like that sometimes, which is just saying, let us not, where you have mainstream business culture that basically pushes back and just says, this is perfectly okay. We are being respectful. We're doing this because we really respect and we love Native Americans. Sometimes like that. This is an example of what completely obliterates trust between communities really wanting to show up, and connect. You have examples like that. Then you have very concrete examples within the Black Lives Matter movement, which is also the same within many other populations, where there is direct physical violence, there is direct systemic inequity in things like banking, in real estate, where there have been studies done that show it is much harder to get financing to grow and expand. It can be harder sometimes to prove credibility and worth through socialization and then also systemic inequity. And a lot of what I talk about with my white peers and with a lot of organizations that might say, we really would love to, like we're excited, we want to be inviting more speakers, or we want to have people that come from different perspectives. We don't always realize there's a lot of work that we need to do in order to, first of all, learn and connect and understand about what other communities are experiencing, and really spend time with permission in getting to know them, supporting their organizations, really learning and listening about what they want to do, and then figuring out what are ways in which we can make sure if somebody comes into my space that historically has really been dominated by usually white males, but in a lot of the coaching world, it's also white females. Is somebody going to feel safe? Are they going to have a microaggression? Is somebody going to come up and say something offensive? Is their authority going to be questioned? Are they going to have to speak for everybody and put on the spot when somebody might ask a question about diversity, equity, inclusion? Just 100 different ways in which we can really learn how to do our own work. And I'm just speaking for my own identity as a white woman, where we can really do our own deeper work of saying, what are ways in which we are contributing to this inequity, or creating an environment that's not going to be open and welcoming? Because for a lot of folks, it's like, oh, okay, there aren't so many Native American speakers, for example, at a conference. I'm just going to invite somebody. And they say, well, I tried. I invited once and they decided not to come. And my point is like, have you actually understood some of the reasons why there might be historically a big lack of trust? Have you thought about spending sometimes years slowly, deliberately supporting spaces in which they are running events and getting to know folks and connecting with them so that you have some relation before you begin to really bring them in? So it's in my own country, but around the world, we see there's deep historic inequity. It's I don't know why it's astounding. It's usually not astounding to folks of color that I talk about, that I talk with about this issue, but it really is just kind of amazing to me that there's still a lot of people who would say, yes, it is perfectly acceptable to have a football team named the Redskins. I mean, after the Black Lives Matter movement and the solidarity from that, they ended up finally changing the name. But it was after 11 years of Amanda and many other Native activists that were basically saying this is totally unacceptable. I mean, it just seems so obvious to me that it's shocking, but apparently not.
Yeah, and for us in the Netherlands, we have similar topics, right? We obviously don't have Native Americans as a big topic here, but we have a couple of popular populist parties who say we need to close the borders because there's now foreigners in here. We need to keep America safe, right? Similar things sound here as well. And we have, for example, around this time, now it's December 9, but around December 5, we celebrate a fest which is called Sinterklaas, and we have a Black Pete, which some may know because it's been in the news in the US as well. And it's what we call a tradition here, but some people can't let go of traditions even if it hurts other people. And I think that's the whole part, is that you need to think about, if it is a tradition, it's fine, we can change it, because traditions shape in history and they change over time, right? We gave a lot of people rights that didn't have rights before. Do you want to go back to that time? No, of course not. You want to stay in this time. And this is a tradition too. You can change, right? For example, and also I remember a discussion which was this week in the government in the Eerste Kamer, which is like, what's it, lower house, I think it is, right? I'm not sure, right? So there was a discussion with there was two colored people in the room, parliament members, and one was talking about that we should call people white and not. I cannot translate that in English, right? blank, which we call people are white, but they are blank. But blank sounds more sophisticated than white, and white is just a color, same as black, right? So, and he says, well, I prefer that you call people white and not blank, because then it's the same reference. And then she goes on and she says, well, I don't get it because I'm colorblind, so I don't see color. What?
Yeah.
So we have similar discussion. I just had a conversation in the previous podcast episode with a professor in Groningen University, and he did a research on diversity, but also specifically about polarization. Right. So he talks about we are increasing in polarization, and he has also a number of solutions to that. And what I'm wondering is how do you see that your space and the work that you do, the people that you bring into your space in your learning lab, how does it help the community on decreasing polarization?
It's an interesting question because it assumes polarization is bad. And when we look at it, I often look in a larger context of development, human development, historical development, idea development, ways in which we go through a transformational experience. The transformational experience, I think Brene Brown calls it the rumbling, sometimes that rumbling that you might go through, to me, or a reckoning. It's a reckoning with the truth. I know every person from every perspective probably says that, but there's some pretty straightforward historical truth about my own country in terms of how it was founded. The land was stolen. The people who were on this land were murdered, raped, pillaged, losing sometimes 90% of the population. Forced, enslaved people were brought over to work for free for hundreds of years to start this economy. And there were policies that were enacted by the usually white male population, specifically designed to center and favor our identity. To me, those are immutable facts. That is exactly what happened. There are different ways that people might choose to look at that, but in the reckoning of having those conversations, those deep, painful conversations that have to do with accountability, that have to do with looking at the truth of the way in which things have happened and the impact on people, that is going to elicit a lot of hard emotional conversations, of behavior that sometimes, in the process of going through that, is going to make people feel polarized. Somebody might say, but wait a minute, that happened a whole long time ago. That doesn't have anything to do with me right now. I didn't personally, oppress anybody, for example. So in the process of us figuring things out, there can be deep, difficult conflict. At the root of, I know for me, part of the way that I look at, and this is very personally, there is a part of really retribution, of acknowledgement, of using the privilege that I have been given unfairly, simply because I was born into white skin, in a way where I have resources, where I have a thriving business, where I can provide a space that will, as I said, just be a space where people can feel good, they can feel safe, they have autonomy. Everybody here has their own key. So when people run programs, they have their own key. They come and go as they please. Of course, they're still with my husband and I here. It is technically our space. And so there is that relationship that we have as we're talking with people about folks coming in to use it. But the idea to, in a very local placemaking perspective, to actually physically have a place right in the middle of Main Street where people can feel like I am welcome here, my identity is welcome here, and then a lot of what I know I do a lot in my communication and conversations with a lot of other people in my community, because I can navigate in a different way as a white woman than sometimes my folks of color friends, then I can be having hard conversations sometimes. I might go to a conference that's a regional economic development conference. This happened, I don't know, a year ago or something before COVID. And it was in a room we're talking about all these economic development plans. I looked around and literally it was 90% white males. And there was very, very, very few women or people of color in the room. And so after everybody was giving their presentations, I was the first to raise my hand and I stood up and I said, I find it's really interesting. We're talking about demographic shifts. We have 35%, Latinx population here. We're talking about, different folks here. And as I look around this room, I really don't see anybody represented whatsoever. That to me is a very active way that I can be using my voice in a way that I hope is going to be of support, where somebody who is a person of color in that room, first of all, may not feel safe saying that, is probably tired of always being the person who has to stand up and say that. So there are ways in which I think we collaboratively can work together to navigate opportunities. I call myself the unpaid professional busybody here downtown. I love people. I love getting to know people. I learn about opportunities. I know about buildings being built. I know about new businesses. And so I can be looking around and say, oh, have you thought about hiring a consultant? You might want to talk to this person who we know here at the lab. And it becomes a way for people to get to know each other. So there are many different ways, I think, that I think about the work that we do at this particular period of time. But what's really important, I was just thinking about this morning, and I know I keep going back to a theory of change, but to me it's really important that we look at the analysis behind what's really our philosophy about the work that we're doing and what do we believe about the change that's being made. In so much of our startup space, our incubators, our programs, and some that are specifically focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, the messaging, the language, the design is really designed with the white gaze, saying, we have the answers. We are training you in order to be leaders and be successful. And that is not what the truth is. And often folks are saying, I don't need another damn incubator program. I want to be able to go to a venture capitalist and have the same access to funding as if I were a white male. Than if, as I am as a Black female founder. I want you to begin to address systemic inequities that are just preventing me from doing the kinds of things that I am perfectly capable of doing. So what we're not making leaders, right? We're not somehow magically, anointing people with leadership. We're just providing space for people who feel comfortable to be here, to share, express, and grow, because I think everybody needs that kind of a space. But in many other small business or incubator spaces, and I'm sure that there's some of that's socialized here just because of my socialization as a white woman. We are not perfect. I'm sure that there are elements of that come through because of the socialization. But in general, hopefully, it's less like somebody who might step into a situation where automatically people might assume that they're not skilled just because they're not white.
What I've started to do since, what was it, last year in the summer, and the Black Lives Matters trending, I think it was like after the
George Floyd murder is really when things started to come out, right? When there were protests. Mm-hmm.
And so what I started to do was then increase the people that I follow on Twitter, for example, and on LinkedIn, but especially on Twitter, including people of color, right? So, and also females, especially also female of color, female of color, yes. And it helps me to see that not everybody sees the things the way that I see it, right?
Yeah.
It helps me to see that there is a different world that I'm not familiar with, and what is normal for me is not normal for them. Right? A normal experience for me is that I don't get pulled over, right? So I don't get regularly pulled over by a police officer. It's a really strange feeling when a police officer will pull me over for no reason, right? So, but it is an experience that people of color in the Netherlands have. So, what is going on here, right? So, So for me, it's interesting to at least um, increase my awareness of what's going on. And I've also tried to do that with talking to people in the podcast that work in this area, people of color, and talk about diversity, about inclusion, and have as much female entrepreneurs on the podcast or experts on the podcast as I can. But it is always difficult if you don't know them. Then you have to really, like you said, you have to really get into it and find and look and search in areas where you are not a regular participant. But I'm doing my best to just not give only the white male 50 plus kind of view, expert view. I love that we talk about this. I love it because I think it's a really important topic, and I'm really happy that we talk about it now. And because I read what you did, right? I read about the wonderful that you had this start with Indigo. You raised money to really get the building, to furnish it, and to refurbish it, and everything. But then what I also found interesting, what you did then is, I have to look it up because I made notes here, is you listen first, and then you gather data. What kind of data do you gather to build your community?
It's really qualitative. It's really in conversation. We've done some through different projects that we have with active participation from all the different, we call them the key guardians, the people who have keys, who run programs here. We've had active conversations sometimes, like when we were we applied for a couple of grants early on, which we didn't get, which was fine. It's just part of the process of organizing and figuring out what we wanted to do. But through that process, for example, is when we did some data gathering of just figuring out, who were coming to events, what were different issues. I did a bigger study that involved both folks here, but also over 2,000 business owners across the US and in Canada. There was an attitudinal segmentation study that was run by my colleague Susan Beyer from Audience Audit, who I also mentioned in the book. She's her method for defining audience is wonderful. So we did a formal study that looked at attitudes that small business owners have toward obstacles and gathered a lot of data that way to really more understand the main issues that were concerning to people. But I'll say fundamentally, and this is a point of view, I always laugh with my brother and sister-in-law because they're both professors at the University of Pittsburgh. They're scientists, they're isotope geochemists, and they have, postdoctorates from Caltech and doctorates from UCLA. I have so much admiration. I always say, like, the math smarts just stopped when it got to me after my smart brother. But
I agree.
I have such appreciation for academics. I'm so in awe of people who can apply that kind of rigor to what they do. I believe 100% in science. I believe in facts and evidence. So nothing wrong with that whatsoever. That said, we can put so much emphasis sometimes on just data and academic research as opposed to really having direct emotional relational conversations over a long period of time. To me, the deepest way I feel like that I really connect and understand, what's going on with folks is being in deep relationship over a long period of time and having conversations, and not conversations with me in a clipboard that's taking down data, but more really getting to know somebody in a natural or organic way. And so that, in many ways, the book, what informed a lot of the approach, of course, what is included in some of the stories, was that kind of relational approach. And now we are at a stage right now, which is really exciting, that after spending about 5 years just basically doing mostly community engagement, just having all kinds of things happen here naturally, that we are partnering with some friends who have been down here the whole time, who are doing really amazing work with the local community in placemaking, in economic development. We're starting a Consultants of Color collective in partnership with them, where we're having methods to be training more consultants that can be within their own communities, helping other people to be consultants who are delivering a lot of this technical support. There are models that we've developed that are very much grassroots community focus, that have a cultural context, that could have some real applications for what other cities are trying to do around the country. And that's something, to me, what gets so exciting about it is where, because we've had this long connection, we've done so much work together and been a community together locally, it becomes really a collective effort that primarily is really designed from people that come from diverse backgrounds in the community. And where that can be a model that we say, okay, now here's a model that is grown from the community that then could be applied in other places and then localized according to, to their community. That's part of really what gets me excited. That's the part of the effectiveness of models, of thought leadership, of codifying things that can be helpful for people. What I find often is we rush too quickly to just name something, to create a program, to create a model. And I did a webinar with some of our partners here. One, it was a Black woman, one was a Navajo woman, and then a Mexican-American man. And they were saying, very often when they might be brought in, let's say to a program, so there's some initiative that, a city is doing or some organization, maybe they're trying to increase equity, and they would bring them in after the whole program is designed and say, what do you think? And they said, by definition, because we were never involved from the beginning in the design, of course, there are going to be gaps because they're going to be missing our perspective. So by definition, whenever we're brought in, we're often the one that is seen as like the adversary. People will get annoyed, like, oh, do we really want to bring these folks in again? They're just going to tell us about everything we've done wrong. And our approach is, don't bring people in when everything is designed. Bring folks in at the very beginning of defining what the problem is, and then collaboratively work to build programs together. And then that's where you're going to have really different, more community-focused outcomes.
See, this is why I like your book, right? So when you talked about the beginning of data collection, the whole book is about data collection. It's the way I see it, right? So it's about the human connection, about really talking to the people around you in your community, but also clients, the people that surround your clients, the people in your network. And it's all about the human connection and learning about them, about what's going on in their world. There's a couple of things I need to mention from the book because I love it. First of all, when I read the section where you talked about this mastermind, and she talked about conversations with strangers, right?
Yeah, Shanae Howard is the person. Yeah, so Shanae Howard is an amazing small business consultant that was sharing with my best friend, Desiree Attaway, who then shared that with her mastermind group. I'm very big on attribution. So it was Shanae's idea of the 100 conversations with strangers.
Yes, you are right. I don't know all the names and you do, so that's good that you do.
Yes, just for the record. Yes.
No, I agree. But it's in your book, so that's why I'm talking to you
That's
about
right.
it.
That's right.
But I love the idea, and I started doing it right away. So I put up a page on my website. I put it on my list for focusing today. Every day I need to talk to like a person. Hopefully it will end up being a stranger every day, because right now I have to find the ways to find the strangers who want to answer these questions with me. But I will get to that, so that's fine. I love the idea, because I think one of the best lessons I learned from a business coach was that when I wanted to get my clients, because people always talk about business owners talk about, how can I get more clients, right? How can I get more clients tomorrow, or maybe even today, right?
That's right.
So the way I talk about this, you have to really start talking to the people that you know, right? Get into your network, talk to them, find out what they are working on, be interested in what they are doing. And if you have like an hour meeting with them, like talk 50 minutes, ask questions and learn from them, and you have like maybe 10 minutes where you can update what you are doing, but let them talk so that you'll learn a lot. And that's a lot of work, right? So then they say, well, can I do it faster? No, this is how you go deep and what you learn, and then your business in the end will grow. And this whole 100 conversations with strangers, this is really something that really rang a bell with me and thought, oh, that is a great idea. I want to add that to my work as well.
Yeah, it's
So
really powerful in the way that I think it was implemented. When you have a very short number of questions, and there were some of the criteria where it was completely confidential, it was not recorded, it was not like data collected necessarily, but where you have the intention in some ways that could be, for example, in part of an emerging part of your own body of work, or even within the core of things that you've done for a long time, where you do just want to deeply listen and get perspectives on what people think about things. And there is that just the nature of that kind of conversation where you can consistently have it. I know it probably goes against what some people think is effective or efficient when, for example, in Desiree's example, she didn't record it, she didn't track it to produce a report or something after. But when she shifted, in the example in the book, she had been doing general organizational consulting and getting to know people, but then she really shifted more to racial equity in particular. And when she was really having these deep conversations with people, that absolutely shaped what she wrote about, the kind of content that she created. It's really powerful. It's a really powerful tool. I agree.
yeah, and you mentioned how the business grew and how the number of people that joined her sessions, workshop, everything grew like enormous. But it's like you mentioned, it is not about collecting data. It's about having these deep conversations with people and learning what's going on in their world, and that's just
Yes.
great. That's just so great. Also, the other concept is tiny marketing actions. I love that term. um, what do you consider tiny marketing actions?
There are a whole different range. The context for within the book is that when you look at all of the different places, and I call them watering holes, so places in person or online where you might find a lot of good connections, or maybe there's somebody who, an example within the ecosystem model would be, let's say, associations. So if you are a service professional and you notice that, wow, CPAs could really use your help as a marketing consultant, you could identify that there is a section of that ecosystem wheel in associations that, as you really put some focused energy into building relationships over time, could be a really good strategic fit for your business. Or you might notice, wow, I really want to start to work with software companies that serve my market, but begin to slowly build those relationships. Or there are some peer thought leader authors that would be really cool to get to know, because I think we have some complementary things. So when you know strategically some of these areas that you might want to be working on, tiny marketing actions are really the way that you slowly and predictably over time plant seeds to begin to make connections. So they're everything from when I call it peanut butter and jelly call, where you might ask one of your favorite clients, which other service providers do you work with? And around the kind of same problem that maybe I'm helping you with. So every day as a business coach, I work with so many other service professionals, intellectual property attorneys, sometimes other specialized business coaches like a branding firm, virtual assistants, etc. I might ask them, like, who are your other really favorite people that you work with? And when you get those referrals, if you feel comfortable and they feel comfortable, you say, would you mind, doing an introduction? And you could just reach out and say, we both work with the same client. They were raving about you. I'd love just to talk for 15 minutes on Zoom so I can just get to know you and your business better. And at every stage, it's like doing really enlightened dating. I've been married a long time, so thank goodness I don't have to worry about dating. But I imagine the way that enlightened dating would be is you really just are present for that moment, and you're not thinking ahead. You're not trying to close a deal and to say, and then let's refer clients to each other, because you need to get to know somebody really well in order to have that comfort. But one of the first steps of a tiny marketing action would be, first, one tiny marketing action would just be to ask a client that. The next day, another tiny marketing action would be to ask another client that. And so it can be something like that. It can be, I like to do it sometimes for my phone. So I have a lot of different connections, colleagues, some of which I've fallen out of connection with. I might just scan. I might be sitting in line at the cafe and I might scan and notice somebody who I love, who I haven't talked to. And I might just send them a quick message and say, how are you? Could be a client, could be some kind of a, a partner, a colleague. The context of it, and it is paradoxical because a lot of the frameworks, the way you organize yourself to be effective at knowing the tiny marketing actions to take, can feel quite transactional if you're enacting them in a transactional way. A lot of folks for years have talked about networking, where you're like, just reach out and send these 3 messages and send these 3 follow-ups. And
Right.
we've probably all been the recipient sometimes of those, where you're like, you don't really like me. Why are you why are you reaching out to me? I can tell you're only reaching out because you might want something. Versus when you live in a bigger context. To me, really goes to the heart of the mission that you are focused on in your business. When you're really passionate about solving the problem that your clients have and contributing something valuable and just being curious about what are ways that we can create a healthier kind of ecosystem and body of work collectively to be serving our clients, it's natural that you're going to be drawn and want to work with people who are really cool. I get very excited when I meet people who I know are really, really, really good at their particular craft. They might not be famous, they might not have any followers whatsoever, but if I know they're like the most amazing person in the world around Google Analytics or, some random thing, it's exciting to do that connection. It's relational. And that's the part of it, I think, that first of all, not everybody is going to be attracted to the method, for sure. That's why we need many people that are teaching business different ways. So I lose my scarf.
Yeah.
But for people who do really enjoy making connections, and for many of the people I've worked with, they get really turned off when everything is too forced and everything is just too fast. Right. It takes time to be building relationships. You and I we haven't spent tons of time together, but we've been aware of each other. We've kind of have this thread, even if we don't see each other all the time. So when you reach out and you tweet to me, it's like, oh, hey, there's my friend, it's like, so good to see you, what's been going on? And we have that connection that's a very natural thing. So there are all kinds of different ways you can do it. Some tiny marketing actions could be going on a site like Canva and, creating some cool graphics, something that might be an inspirational quote if that's important for your audience, or sharing and retweeting work from other people. I have hundreds of different ways that you can look at what tiny marketing actions are. What's important about the philosophy is that when you do make a plan and you are strategic about the kinds of seeds that you're planting consistently, it allows you just to be doing it. You're measuring yourself by, am I being consistent in reaching out on a consistent basis? Not, I reached out once and that person never got back to me, therefore tiny marketing actions don't work. Like, it is not about the immediate results.
But it is difficult, right? The consistency, because I personally, right? So what I do is, when you have a little bit more time, you have a little bit less clients at the moment, you have a little bit more, less appointments, then you have more time to reach out to people and to connect with them, right? And to ask them a question or look how they were doing. And sometimes you have many clients and talks and conversations and appointments, and you lose track of people and you forget them and you don't reply to emails of them. And so I also find it sometimes very difficult to be consistent in this area, because, right? So I don't want to be strategical, so I don't have spreadsheets and track everything and all this stuff. I don't do that, but still, I also want to keep in touch with people, right? I want to make sure that I know what's going on. So I also sometimes find it pretty difficult to have some consistency there. But I'm pretty sure that, like you, when you follow people and at some point you see that they have something new and you contact them again, that they know, even if we didn't talk for a year, oh yeah, right, that's my friend, and she's doing this now, and now she's dead. And so it's still, you can still contact them and still ask them a question to help you with something or to do something together or whatever. So I think consistency is good, but also it shouldn't, it doesn't have to be very strategical that you have to have everything written down in a logbook and saying, okay, now on Tuesday I need to contact them again because it's my third message and I need to do 12 touch points and stuff like that, right?
I mean, for some people, yes, for some people, no. Here's what I'll say, and this is a little bit of my like business coach, coming out. And this is where we just talked at the top of the conversation about the difference between ourselves as individuals, our individual preferences, and what our business needs. Because I often joke with people that in finance, we have a credit score, at least here in the US, right? We have a credit score. We have our internal revenue service that makes sure that we account for every dollar that comes in and out that we have to report. If we make poor decisions and we fall down on that, there is a score. Now, it can be very punitive and shame-based, and there's a lot I don't like about that system. We don't have anything to ensure that we're actually enacting our marketing operations on a consistent basis that is absolutely the lifeblood of our business if we want it to be strong and sustainable. So just like you and I would never 70% of the time show up on our coaching calls with our clients, we're like, of course not, because we're focused on service delivery and we're going to be 100% there when we commit to be there with clients. I do have a point of view that we need to commit in marketing operations. If we personally, it's not all about tiny marketing actions for us as individuals. For some clients, first of all, they might not have as big of a wingspan as I might have as a big extrovert to be holding many different individual conversations. Those tiny marketing actions might be things that members of their team can enact. But it's to be strategic about it because it's like water in a garden. A garden will not survive without water. And what happens if we lead it to, and I'm not just picking on you, it's you, me, and everybody. If we don't really put it into our strategic plan and resource it and block out the time, if we're not consistent ourselves, which I'm not always personally, then we need to also employ other people to have that function of the business. Because otherwise we just get too busy. And then by the time we start to enact them, that's when it takes a while to get things up and running, and that can be scary to have big dips in cash flow.
Right. Okay. We need to end this conversation. I have one more question because I read the About page and I was going like, hey, that's interesting. You worked together with Susan Cain.
I did for 18 months.
How did this happen?
Through my friend Jonathan Fields.
Ah.
He introduced us right. It was actually the day after I turned in the manuscript to Body of Work. I started working with Susan Cain and her co-founder Paul Sciabetta, where they were just at the beginning stages of starting the Quiet Revolution based on her amazing book, Quiet. And so I work with them in the early stages of building out that first phase of their business. They've gone through some different iterations, but at that stage, we built the Quiet Leadership Institute. We had a corporate offering that they were working on that they've since transitioned. Now she has an amazing website called quietrev.com, but I did all kinds of really fun and interesting work with her and her team to help build the Quiet Revolution. So it's part of why I have such a passion for introverts, for understanding the power and strength of introverts. And I am the only extrovert in my entire family, my family of origin, and also my own family. My husband and our kids are all introverts. I'm the only extrovert. So God bless them. Because
you do all the work for them.
they have to deal with me.
Oh, Pamela, it was so wonderful to talk to you and learn about all this information you gave us. And I'm so happy we didn't just talk about the book, because I think it gives such a more broad perspective on your point of view on how this works, on how you work, and what you set up. And I think it's so interesting that you want to learn more and buy the book and read about the whole method, because I think it's really important for small business owners to look into this, especially what you just talked about in the last point, right? That you have to be strategic about it. And the whole process is a way to work strategically about it. So that's why it's so great. Thank you so much, Pam.
Thanks for having me.